ladies and gentlemen. My name is Total Biscuit of the WoW podcast Blue Please on cynicalbrit.com. I'm here to ask one simple question. WTF is Ruse? And here to help me answer that question is the resident lecherous bastard of Cynical Brit Vent. Please welcome Mr. Stormgale.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I will look forward to pounding your base into dust in this game.
Tends to happen. So, Ruse is quite different. Let's just put it that way. Very, very different to your normal everyday RTS.
Yeah, it's very heavily focused on strict countering of units and sort of subterfuge tactics like misdirection and hiding in forests and such to get an advantage over the enemy, as opposed to, say, StarCraft, where it's blob units, charge at enemy, hope you have more units.
Yeah, it's quite intriguing, actually. It reminded me somewhat of Supreme Commander in a way. Specifically, the way that you actually view the battlefield is quite unique.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things I like, and if you, as you're recording this, if you can zoom out, it sort of turns into this square map in like a war room with people moving around and all sorts of tokens. So that nice little effect as it zooms all the way out.
Yeah, some people actually made the remark that it's like a quite slow real-time board game, although in some of the competitive matches we've played, slow is not exactly what I'd call it.
Well, it's very brutal, that's the thing, is that if you can outmaneuver the opponent, you can completely crush them with less units. And that's what tends to happen in our games.
Yeah, our games are fairly brutal and in some cases fairly one-sided in your favour. As you can see right here, I'm sitting here, I'm a level 6. Now, level 6 doesn't mean anything, as far as I'm aware. It's just sort of a ranking. It indicates how experienced you are at the game, and it tries to match you up accordingly in the ranked setting.
Basically, any game you play, whether it's single player or multiplayer, you'll get experience for time, you know, the amount of units you've lost, the amount of units you've killed. And as you can see, I'm level 28 because I've been playing a lot of single player. So this might not be, you know, the most balanced of matches.
Now, the purpose of this match, more than anything, it's a exhibition match in the most literal sense of the word. We're here to exhibit the game. We're going to try and show you the pros and cons. We're going to show you, hopefully, almost everything in action. So this game might go on for longer than you might expect. So I'm actually going to increase the time limit just in case, because it's a score-based game.
At the end of the game, if you haven't completely wiped out the enemy, you tally up your scores based on the number of units you killed. Obviously, the bigger units are worth more, and whoever has the most points wins. So you can be on the verge of defeat, but if that timer ticks down and you killed more of his guys than he's killed of yours, you can still come out a victor.
Indeed. I'm not 100% sure as to what I think about that, really, but let's kick it into the game, and I'm sure we can discuss that in just a moment. So we're just going to launch this for you. Now, Ruse does have a campaign game, but as far as I'm concerned, the best way to play this game is simply via the multiplayer mode.
Yep, and we're playing on a 1 versus 1 map, but there are 2 versus 2, 3 versus 3, 4 versus 4, and free-for-all versions. I think it comes with about 15 to 20 maps.
Yes, it does. It does have quite a significant number. Now, what you're seeing on my screen right now is the building interface. Now, buildings here, it's fairly basic in the way that you build things. You start with the headquarters, and the first thing you want to do is capture at least 2 supply depots. These are self-explanatory. They bring supplies via truck back to your base, and they make you virtual internet dollars, and you spend those on internet tanks.
Yep, and everything comes out of your HQ, these little building trucks. Now, they are very vulnerable. I mean, only 1 shot or 2 from any unit will destroy them. So if you can, hide your units around and intercept his building trucks, he doesn't get the money back. So it's very careful to make sure they don't get attacked.
Indeed. Now, the first thing you might notice is there's a pair of cards in the top left-hand corner of the screen.
Those are our ruses. Those are the various little tricks of sorts that we can apply to the battlefield. And if TB can open them up, he can show you some of them.
Indeed. The one that usually gets used at the start of all of our games is one called Blitz. There has been an argument that this is more useful than most. I would say that it's definitely more utilitarian, but it's not quite as fun as some of the others. What we're going to do is we're probably both going to use a blitz, if Stormgale hasn't already, to speed up the units in a particular sector. So if I select that with the F key, you'll see that my entire home sector there is available to blitz. I will then activate the Ruse, and then my trucks will start moving quicker.
And that's one of the other things about the Ruses. They don't apply globally to the battlefield. They only apply in these sectors. So it's very important to focus where you're applying your abilities.
Indeed.
Because it's no good to blitz. Sorry.
The thing about it is that your home sectors are much larger than the other sectors, so blitzing in your area is really easy, but blitzing outside of your area, it's not quite as simple, and you often have a very narrow corridor that you can move in at higher speed.
So obviously your blitz is useless if it's deployed in an area where your people aren't moving around. So you've got to be very careful with it.
Now we have various buildings production-wise, and you'll see that I've been deploying a variety of different units.
And if you TV would look over at me, I have a barracks and an airfield, and I'm starting to deploy air units.
Indeed.
Now, as you can see, my units that are out of range over on my side of the map, they're just counters. You can't actually see what they are, you can only see that they're light units. Now, if TB wants to apply a spy ruse, he can have a look at what they actually are.
I'm going to do that right now to that particular area. And now I can see that he's moving in Grenadier Light Infantry. Now, I have some howitzers, so I'm going to indirect fire down there, and I'm going to try and smash them up. Now, this, if I'm zoomed all the way out, all it shows is a bunch of counters, but I can zoom all the way in, and I will see there are a bunch of infantry moving around in these unarmored trucks, and I'm attempting to shell them at this point in time. So I can zoom all the way in and notice the destruction as it lands.
Yeah, but my guys can't fight back, and they're just getting pounded to dust.
That they are. Now, I've noticed that you now have a recon plane out, and you are actually strafing me with some kind of fighter.
Yep, those are my ME-109 fighters, and they're good at air superiority, and their machine guns can strafe your lightly armored defenses.
Indeed. This is a game about hard, brutal counters, and I do mean hard and brutal.
An important thing of note, though, is that my fighters and machine guns would be useless against tanks, or any armoured unit or building, so if you deploy anything heavier, they're pretty much going to be useless.
Indeed. So obviously what I want to do here is to try and stop those fighters from having their wicked way with my artillery pieces by deploying some anti-aircraft guns, which is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm also noticing that he's moving some light units down the road into an area that's a little worryingly close to my base, so I'm going to try and respond to that with some Vickers light tanks.
Recruitment has started, sir.
Now, this game is actually extremely good in terms of slick and easy-to-use controls. It was developed in tandem for PC and console, but as it turns out, the PC controls are actually very responsive. Now, as my opponent is blatantly thinking about what to do next, I'm moving into this town, and I want to show you something that might not work out in my favor so much. Now, infantry units have the ability to hide inside towns, and you'll see there, he hid them in the forest, and a brutal surprise attack annihilated my tank column. There's absolutely no way that I can get in there whatsoever. I'm going to have to do something about that, and I'm going to have to think of how exactly that's going to work.
And my heavily armoured recon have managed to move up to your artillery without too much worry, and are now routing. That's one of the other things of this game. Units can be destroyed, and obviously that happened to his tanks, but if they get heavily damaged, they rout and retreat first, which gives them time to heal, but obviously they're not shooting.
Indeed. Now, I'm actually charging across the field with infantry and anti-aircraft guns in a desperate attempt to take out his armoured recon, which is not really helping all that much. What I can do, however, is use a ruse called Terror to try and drive his units away, to try and force them to retreat.
Yep, and terror means that your units will route at a much higher percentage than usual. It takes a lot less damage to make them retreat. It's very good for countering rushes of, say, light units as infantry, because you can just pick them off and completely blunt their assault. However, I am going to counter with fanaticism, which means that my units cannot retreat or be rotated, and they will fight to the death, but sadly
There's your
it was
death.
useless.
Indeed. Well, I was able to put enough pressure on him there, but as regards to how many units I lost, well, I did lose quite a few. The nice thing about infantry is that they are extremely cheap, but as you saw earlier, they're very effective if placed in the right kind of location. Now, what you've got to worry about here are things like supply lines. If your game goes on too long, those supply depots are going to run out. And you can tell how much supply you've got by looking at the 4 yellow squares in each of the supply depots. Right now, the one near my base has 2, which means it's about half full. It's got 108 internet dollars remaining in it. So I've got to think now about how I'm going to expand my economy. The problem with expanding the economy is that supply lines come into effect, and supply lines can be very easily raided. Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to use a new ruse called decryption, which will allow me to see the orders of various units. I can check the orders of my enemy, and I can notice that they have been ordered to move all the way over there. And what I can do is, in response, I can move to intercept.
Warfare has stopped in this sector, sir.
Now, unfortunately, it seems that Stormgale is sending a small raiding force into the town near my supply depot. Now, if those are infantry units, they'll be able to hide in there and ambush anything that comes through. That can be problematic. However, there is a counter. In fact, there are several potential counters to this. My chosen counter is I'm going to build a couple of howitzers.
Burning wreckage. And you're going to shell me out of that. You evil,
Pretty
evil man.
much. Armored Recon is getting absolutely smashed to pieces there, but as my supply trucks moved through, they were destroyed, and I've lost that potential income. Now, there's a couple of things I can do. I'm going to get the howitzers out, and I'm going to see what I can do with that. Try and soften them up a little bit. I'm also moving in a Churchill super heavy tank into Dungavan, the town. Unfortunately, that tank may be ambushed by anti-tank fire. And there goes the surprise attack right there. The question is it enough? Well, in this case, yes it is. It was enough to drive the Churchill back.
But luckily your artillery was able to take me out before I could finish you.
Indeed. I don't know if any of the French are still hanging around in this area, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it.
Does not seem like a smart move.
Tiger tanks moving across the range, which is problematic for my light artillery. They will not be able to do too much against that. So I'm going to have to reconsider exactly my battle plan. There are a few possibilities there. I could build some anti-tank weapons, which is probably a good idea. So in order to do that, I'm going to build an anti-tank base.
Receiving report, our unit has been destroyed. Sir, reporting losses.
Now, it looks like I also need to deal with those dive bombers as well. Several Junkers dive bombers actually heading in on the Churchill tank. Churchill tank is holding up, but only just. Very heavy armor there.
We've been given a new ruse. Receiving report. Our units are under fire.
I also need to very much consider the possibility of expanding my economy because I'm running out of resources right here, and that could be an absolutely deadly mistake.
Sir, move to position and deploy.
And now
How
to
much left
stop
of the
your
town
shelling,
is there?
No, it appears to be burning. Now, to stop you shelling my lovely armored assault, I'm going to activate the ruse radio silence. Now, what this means is that unless you can draw a direct line of sight on my units, they will be invisible, which means you can't pound them from afar.
Supply depot here to position.
Now, in response to that, to try and delay your assault, and obviously I'm telling him this, so he's well aware of what's happening, I am activating one of the trademark abilities of Ruse, which is the fake assault. What this does, as you might imagine, is deploy a large collection of fake units which will head in the direction of his armored column. And the aim is to confuse him as to what is real and what is not.
Fire. HQ confirms that the enemy has radio blackout in this sector, sir. Spies now activating, sir.
Also activating my spy to ensure that I can draw a bead on his Tiger. Unfortunately, the Tiger, with the combination of the dive bombers, was able to take out my advanced Churchill, which is going to be a problem.
Squad commander, open fire on target. Unleash a storm, lads. Light up the sky like it was night.
Now, I do have a response
Now,
to this. The question is, can I get it in time?
Reporting enemy dummies down, sir. Sir, it's been confirmed. The
Well,
enemy
here's
is
hoping so.
radio silence.
One of the other important things in Ruse is that those convoys obviously will move back towards your headquarters. However, I am building a secondary headquarters, which means that if I decide to take those supply bases on the what would be Total Biscuits left, the trucks will have much less to move, much less far to move, and will be able to get me my money much faster, and are less likely to get completely destroyed by Total Biscuits.
Sir, the agent we sent us.
Indeed. I am attempting to fire there on the Tiger tank with some fairly light anti-tank guns, hoping to overwhelm with sheer weight of numbers. It's not really working out too well. However, what I can do with these is I can place them in the forest, which makes them much harder to hit, and gives them the potential to execute a surprise attack for critical damage.
However, luckily I planned ahead, and those two armoured recons ensure that you cannot surprise me because they can see into the woods. That's one of the main counters to infantry or other units hiding in woods, is the recon units. They can see quite a bit far way into the woods and deny them the ability to surprise attack.
Indeed, and it's certainly strongly recommended that you utilize such things. This is really a game about combined arms and hard counters. What you'll find is that you might execute a very successful strategy at the start, but it can rapidly turn against you when your opponent builds a hard counter. And the game makes it very easy and very quick to do so.
Squad commander, go to your new position.
The actual individual cost of units and buildings in this game is not all that high. However, you do have to be very concerned about losing expensive units, like, say, that Tiger that just ran into an ambush with those 82 PDR anti-tank guns hiding in the forest.
Sir, enemy is enforcing radio silence.
Indeed, even the heaviest of assaults can be blunted with the right counter.
Spies on his way.
For example, if you were to bring up your anti-air again, you could easily rip through my fighter bombers, which you appear to be doing.
Indeed, now I do have another couple of ideas to deal with those fighter bombers. There's not just one counter, there's a lot of different counters, and it's also about using the terrain to your advantage.
HQ confirms that the enemy has radio blackout in this sector, sir.
In addition to forest, the buildings of the cities will actually block most fire. So, for example, if I wanted to avoid one of his tanks, I could dance around a city and he wouldn't be able to draw a bead on me.
Negative, sir. We are out of supplies.
Indeed, and it's generally a very good idea to do so. As to how to do it, well, you've got to look at the way that the city's set out. There's not much left of this one that I'm zooming in on right here, but normally you could just place your infantry around a corner, and direct line of sight does come into play.
Commander, you have your orders. Destroy target. Our
The other thing that you'll find on most maps is rivers. And with the limited amount of bridge crossings, you can easily hold those choke points with longer range units and force the enemy into a bottleneck, which is another way you can use the terrain to your advantage.
Now what I'm trying to do is work
Yeah,
out which of these are decoy units and which aren't. There's decoy units all over the map at the moment.
And because my TB is getting heavily entrenched, I'm starting to use heavy rocket launchers to shell his positions.
Now, of course, I'm going to need to counter that with something, and I can think of a few things that might work. First things first, however, I need to try and get air superiority.
support in progress in the sector, sir.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy some more anti-air, and I'm also going to deploy some Spitfires, which are advanced fighters. Some of the, if not the best fighter in the game, certainly very close. They're very fast, they're very effective, they do a lot of damage, and they can also take quite a punishment.
Unit reports damage, sir. Open fire on designated target.
Unfortunately, my paratroopers that are dropped into that forest are taking a heavy shelling, and I want to try and do something about that. Now, it's risky, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my Churchill through the city, and I'm hoping there's nothing in there. What I want to do is try and drive those artillery back. Well, my artillery howitzers returning fire over there, but I do seem to lack the firepower in order to make that work.
How much does a Churchill cost, by the way, in internet dollars?
Churchill costs 40 internet dollars.
So you just saw I was able to take out his Churchill that costs 40 with 2 of my infantry which cost 5. So it
Indeed.
really does allow you to...
You can do a lot of damage with that. Unfortunately, my Spitfire can't really do too much against 4 of those Messerschmitt 109s. However, they're not going to last all that long if they run straight into my anti-aircraft fire. Taking some heavy damage on my howitzers there, and I'm going to have to do something about that. Fortunately, I still don't have air superiority, which is extremely problematic.
Sir, HQ has provided us with a new Ruse. Recruitment has started, sir.
And the airfield is extremely powerful because not only does it enable you to fly aircraft, but it also enables you to do paradrops, which can disrupt supply lines very effectively.
Our units are under fire. Sir, blitzing is no longer possible in this sector.
Now, this game actually looks surprisingly good for something that is a little bit Supreme Commander and certainly very much a macro game. I mean, you can zoom all the way out and play it from a board game style perspective, but you can also zoom all the way in and you'll find that it's very nice to look at.
Open fire on designated target.
I mean, the attention to detail is amazing. If you zoom right in on the barrack, they've got tents, they even got a little shooting range set up, at least on mine.
Reporting. Unit fleeing.
Indeed they do. I'm trying to do a paradrop. Unfortunately, there's a fighter bomber which was able to take out my transport before it got there.
Sir, reporting losses. Sir, reporting one of our...
Massive amounts of shelling coming in there, which is not good at all. I'm actually getting driven back here.
Sir, our unit has been wiped out. Sir.
My economy is being quite disrupted as well. I'm actually running a very long supply line at the moment. That's very risky.
Or to stop me shelling your buildings, you might as well show the new Ruse, one of the Ruse's camo nets.
Indeed. Camouflage nets only work on buildings, unfortunately, so I'm going to lose all of my non-fixed emplacements, artillery and anti-air cannons, but what I can do is I can shield my base from incoming artillery fire by hiding it. So he's not going to be able to do too much against that for the time being, but that's not going to last forever.
Blitzing in this sector.
Well, the problem with those anti-tank guns that I was deploying there against your artillery is they move very slowly, and they're also quite fragile. There are alternatives. There are, in fact, the Archer tank destroyers, which would probably work much better.
Building deployment completed.
You can see the shelling coming in right here. Barely any chance of those anti-tank guns doing anything, and that building is completely toast.
And this is also one of the important things. Because the resources are scattered all across the map in these supply depots, it's very important to get control of the map so you can get those resources and leverage them to basically win.
Indeed. The problem with the supply system is that it can be very easily disrupted. We're talking about fast-moving units, we're talking about paradrops, we're talking about potential ambushes on bridges, in cities, and in forests. Now, I'm fairly secure right now, but a selection of fighter bombers, or a paradrop, or even just a quick strike with light armored units would eliminate a lot of the cash that I've got coming in and actually starve me out.
Squad commander, open fire on target. Acknowledge. Tracking target.
I'm actually re-establishing my economy here, but I am seeing large collections of units starting to move down. I'm going to have to respond to that.
Unit being ambushed. Taking heavy fire. Yes, sir. Starting unit production.
Oh dear. Sadly, it ran my anti-tank unit straight into the middle of a city, which was not a particularly good idea.
We've been given a new Ruse.
Attempted air superiority there by Stormgale, taking a lot of fire from anti-air emplacements that I brought along. Main problem I've got right here is that my infantry is not going to get there in time.
You have your target. Destroy it. Over.
I think one of the nice things about Ruse especially is that the factions are quite different.
Starting unit production.
Indeed.
I mean, for
What are the
example, I'm
strengths of the German faction?
Unit suffered surprise attack.
The German faction's strength is in its research. It can pretty much research some of the most advanced units in the game. And one of my unique units, which I'm going to deploy now to great effect, is the Flak 88mm.
Now, my infantry are running into a massive selection of ambushes here. What I should have done is to deploy my recon plane first, and I've just lost a bunch of regulars as well as an anti-aircraft gun that I ran in there for good measure. Those entrenched infantry are going to be difficult to eliminate.
I'm afraid we're lacking the resources for that, sir. Rookies are training, they'll be ready soon.
My resources are very much starved right now. Now, you might wonder, well, what happens if you run out of resources? Well, you can build something called an administration building. The problem is it costs $100 internet dollars. And that's a lot of money in Ruse, honestly. What happens? Isn't it a one internet dollar per second that I believe it generates?
One every 4, actually.
Yeah, so it's nowhere near as good. It's pricey, but there are some strategies that involve actually building one very early, so that it makes up for the time that it takes to... think about it. You know, 1 every 4 seconds and it costs 100. Now, that's 400 seconds to actually get the money back that you invested in it. You're looking at about 7.5 minutes, 6.5 maybe, give or take. And an average match of Ruse will last about 25 minutes, assuming it goes all the way.
Unit reports damage, sir.
To get my recon the hell out of there. Yes, you've got a verbal Wind out as well, I noticed, that mobile anti-air cannon.
Yes, that's built from the prototype factory. That is one of the most advanced units I can build, and it is a very effective anti-air unit, and quite heavily armoured.
It's not bad against infantry, as I recall, either.
Obviously, it can rip apart infantry. That's one of the good things about the anti-air units in this game, is they can generally be repurposed to take care of infantry quite effectively.
Indeed, I'm being forced back rather significantly here, and I'm actually losing my economy. You can see by the score there, it's really no contest at this time. And what we're probably going to do after this is we're going to just go at it with a higher speed game, as opposed to simply mucking about and showing you everything that there is to go. Ruse can be a little bit rush-orientated. Rushes can be effective, but you do have to be very careful about what you rush with.
Sir, it's been confirmed.
Yeah, as I was saying, as you've seen with various tank assaults and cities, if you can see a rush coming and can position your units effectively, even infantry, you can pretty much tear an assault apart and then counter rush.
Indeed, and a counter rush can be absolutely devastating. Since you don't have all that much money at the start, if you invest it all into one thing, then it can end up in a disastrous mess.
And if you look over to Clonmel, this is the other purpose of infantry and why they are one of the best units in the game. You can send them over and you can capture enemy installations. So, for example, I'm starting to hoof them across the map now.
You'll notice the verbal Wind there was able to take down that was a Winchester bomber in 2 shots, which is quite ridiculous. Yeah, you have some very advanced stuff now.
Flak 88s were backing it up.
Indeed. Yeah, now he's managed to capture a secondary headquarters. The funny thing about infantry is actually they take no time at all to capture a building, and that could actually be... I feel that's a little overpowered, honestly.
The big problem is that infantry are very fragile, but can be very effective or capturing buildings. The problem being that there are enough ways to mitigate, either, for example, by blitzing or by using that fanaticism ability, so they don't run away. You can just charge a mob of infantry at a building, and one of them is going to capture it, and then you can just build from that building.
Indeed. Thankfully, however, you can very easily recapture it. Like so. So it's not that bad.
Sir, enemy is blitzing
But it can be
the center.
extremely irritating.
Move to the indicated position.
Now, as you can see, I'm pretty much boned, so I'm going to give up right here and surrender. But Ruse is really interesting, honestly. It's just so different to everything I've played in the last couple of years, really. And it gives you a bit of a Supreme Commander vibe. It's a little bit like a real-time war game. Got a little bit of board game thrown in there as well. And I like the fact that it's got this grander strategy going on without all of the complexity of, say, a Paradox mega game like Hearts of Iron or one of the more traditional war games. It is very engaging, it is quite entertaining, it is sufficiently different, and thing I will say is that it's a Ubisoft game that doesn't have that horrendous DRM that the other stuff has. So it's actually a Steamworks title, which is why I bought it to begin with. But I'll probably put up a couple more videos about Ruse over the next couple of weeks, just because it's something I'm playing right now, and I think that there is potential there to have a look at a few strategies and try and figure out the best way that the game works, because the game is really in a bizarre state of flux at the moment. The metagame is all over the place. I played some ranked matches, and people don't really seem to necessarily understand what works, and it does seem to shift. I mean, there was a long beta period for this game, whereby you had all sorts of different strategies being employed, and there'd be a favourite strategy that came into play and would be used by a lot of people, and then someone would figure out a counter to it. And because of the way that everything is so brutally hard-counted, and the fact that there are 6 fairly varied factions in the game, you do have a lot of variety there. So it's a fun game, it's enjoyable, I've been playing it quite a bit, and it might be something that you want to have a bash at, honestly. So yeah, I'll bring some more Ruse videos in the next couple of weeks, alongside the WoW videos, the StarCraft 2, and anything else that I decide to do. My name's been Total Biscuit, and I was joined there by Stormgale, providing a little bit of co-commentary there, and some insight into what he was doing in the game, and I will see you next time.